We're good.
All
Whenever
right.
you're ready, Josh.
Okay. Hail cheaters. Welcome to the Always Cheating Podcast, second podcast of the preseason. But I feel like this is more of a proper preview pod, right? We are officially looking into, we're actually doing some work, some actual research this time. We're not reacting as much. We are proacting. I don't know. We're being proactive. That's what's going on in this pod.
Wonderful. Yeah, like last week when the game launched, lots of reactions from diehard players. And once we get into the regular season of FPL, that's like my favorite content because it's easy to react. What did we see in the games that weekend? It's really hard to look forward, to cast about for the answers before we know them. So this is really when the hard work begins.
Yeah. If it were easy, everyone would do it, Brandon. You know, exactly. I think Kennedy talked about this, right? We want to do it because it's hard. So here we are.
We should put a fantasy manager on the moon, Josh, if we can.
We really should. I know. I've got presidential stuff on the brain. A crazy day in America today, Brandon. It's been a very dramatic summer, I have to say. So we are live. I am Josh. I'm here with Brandon Kelly. We're in New York. Actually, Brandon is currently in Toronto, but we are Americans. And hail cheaters. Welcome to the pod. Welcome, Brandon, to our second pod of the season.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. I'm going to see your Dulwich Hamlet kit. And yes, I think we got a few corrections on the pronunciation of Dulwich Hamlet. And I'm raising you Venezia FC, freshly promoted back to Serie A. Weirdly, for kits, I'm wearing their last season's third kit that looks like a gondolier. They do not have a kit manufacturer going into this season. So we'll see how that works out.
You just have that's like Kappa. Is that the brand that you've got on the front there? Yep.
Yeah, you don't see Kappa kits in the Premier League much these days, mostly in other European leagues. I'm pro Kappa. Fulham had a Kappa kit for a while. They do good stuff.
When I was a kid, I thought that Kappa logo was like the raciest thing I'd ever seen in my life. You know,
well, you would only in America only see it on like mud flaps on big 18-wheel trucks on the freeway.
right. And I am actually repping an Always Cheating T-shirt right now, Brandon. Yeah. So we're like Trader Joe's, Brandon. We wouldn't sell anything that we wouldn't personally own ourselves. So that's what we're doing. And then I don't think I mentioned this last time, but I also have every time you and I have gone to a Premier League match, we've picked up some scarves. And so I've got my little scarf collection behind me here. And I still to this day regret, Brandon, not getting a Brighton scarf. I got a flag, which is kind of fun, but I really wish I had that scarf. And I know I could go online and buy it, but that feels like cheating somehow to me. It's not the same, sadly. So what are we doing in this week's pod, Brandon? What's the theme?
Well, we're talking about forwards. So this worked well for us last season. Instead of sort of like trying to muddle through team by team, this is how fantasy managers think about players in roughly three positions: forwards, midfielders, and defenders, and we'll include goalkeepers in that defender conversation.
Right.
So this is first of our three previews, position by position. We'll talk about forwards today, then come in next week with midfielders and defenders and goalkeepers the following week as we get closer to the game week 1 deadline. So I think this is a great pool of players, like just forwards general. It's like fantasy managers' bread and butter because that's where all of our goals are. Mostly just goals. Midfielders, it's complicated because you're getting goals, assists, and all sorts of other bells and whistles. This just feels like real meat and potatoes stuff. Like, do you have any initial impressions on the pool of forward candidates for the season as you were kind of looking through the assets and the stats?
Well, my initial impression was that there are three forwards that I'm really excited about. And then I find there to be a pretty significant drop off after those three. And maybe I'll just tease it right there, Brandon, and we'll get more into the forward talk in a second here. But I did want to say we're now, what is it, are we 4 days into the season being live?
Is that roughly what it is? We're like we're D-Day +4.
Yeah.
D4.
So I wanted to share where we are right now in terms of ownership. Like we're already seeing some pretty extreme. We saw this a lot last season, right? Where it was like almost universal ownership for some players. And we're not quite at that extreme yet. But I think we are seeing, and I share with you, Brandon, I had a lot of fun. I'm happy to shout them out. FF Stuff had a lot of fun this preseason digging through FF Stuff's data. And this is what we're looking at right now in terms of overall ownership through the first 4 days of the season. And I think it's especially, I think, useful to look at overall ownership the first 4 or 5 days of the season, because the kind of people who create accounts early on in the season are people who take the game maybe especially seriously, right? So
Right.
That's a little tempered, because you also have the auto pick people who literally just go like me until like 6 hours ago, which is that they literally just go in, create a team, and then don't kind of do anything about it for 2 or 3 weeks. They just kind of go in
about
to get
that later.
Exactly, get that low ownership number. But I think one thing we're seeing right away is that Watkins is extremely highly owned to start the season. Maybe unsurprisingly, it's a very good price. I feel like at 9 million, played well this summer in the in limited minutes for England. They have a nice start to the season for Aston Villa do as well. So yeah, I mean, I have to say, if there was one, I'm part of the crowd here, because if there was one kind of mortal lock for my squad going into game week 1, it has to be Ollie Watkins, right? I mean, I know, and I know you're even like a bigger fan of Watkins than I am.
I love Ollie Watkins, and it's hard for me. Maybe it is because I'm an Ollie stan that somehow his game winner that he scored to send England into the final, to me, was a better goal than Jude Bellingham's bicycle kick to take that match into extra time. So I'll give Ollie credit for that. I'm not sure many people will agree, but just sort of like,
not sure I agree.
There are various types of technique, and Ollie exhibits he just has all the fundamentals that he's put together in this exceptional athlete's body, and like his lack of injury history, his strength on the ball. These are all things that we love. The concerns that you have about Ollie Watkins going into this season, and I'm actually kind of compelled by them, is Aston Villa in the Champions League. Right. How does that work? These are more matches than Ollie Watkins might be used to playing. He kind of had, I guess, the perfect summer for a player like Ollie, where he got some meaningful minutes in a meaningful competition, but he wasn't run into the ground like maybe we think Saka might have been. So he's going to be sharp coming into the preseason.
The one question I wonder about is, obviously these matches are only 90 minutes, maybe longer if you include, if they go to extra time, if it's a, an elimination game or something like that. Clearly that's, they are match minutes, so they're very intense, but is it the matches themselves, or is it the practice, right? Like, because presumably they're kind of practicing all day, right? So even though it's like he doesn't get that many minutes in the matches, is it the fact that he's just kind of training with the team? He's not really relaxing. Does that weigh on him at all? Right? Like, it's like, it's like he didn't literally have minutes in the matches, but is that where all of the intensity comes from? And it's like, I don't know.
I think that training at the elite level is just like so perfectly calibrated. I think even depending on what your niggles might even be day to day, so that doesn't worry me at all. It's like, why would that to me feels better than Holland or Grealish, hanging out on the beach or in a casino in Las Vegas, where their muscles might be a little tighter coming into training, and and maybe they just haven't been thinking about the game as much. Now that's like a very unrealistic example, but I think you know what I mean there.
Yeah, they're all young guys. I mean, I think I basically agree with you. I mean, you just want to avoid the like Alexis Sanchez zone, right, where you just play every single minute for your club and elimination minutes. And I think that Watkins will be fine. I mean, sort of famously too, and I'm not trying to jinx him here, but he is, had an incredible injury record as well. I mean, Watkins just basically does not get injured. He's one of the healthiest players in the Premier League, especially the forward spot, where you often see, I mean, Holland, Gabriel Jesus, kind of nonstop. Any number, you pick the forward, Brandon, I'll give you a long and gnarly injury record, except for Watkins. After that, we've got Cole Palmer in terms of overall ownership to start the season. I have to admit, at the moment, I do not have Palmer in my squad. I am Palmerless to start the season, Brandon. Now, this may change, right? I mean, we're still, again, the game's been out for 4 days. We're not even in August yet. But at the moment, I am finding it hard to fit Palmer into my squad at 10.5 million.
So you don't have him just because you can't fit him in, not because you can make a compelling
yeah. I'm not like keeping.
Yeah,
I'm not keeping like 7 million on my bench or or in my bank to spend later. Yeah, I'm just finding it hard. I think because I do at the moment like the idea of having 3 expensive forwards up top, and it kind of feels like you've got to either you do that or you have Palmer. And I mean, Salah to me is completely out of the question. Like I don't know how you could have Salah. And I guess that's because I have Haaland too. Right. And so that's really the key question is, do you want Haaland or don't you? And we talked a little bit about it on Wednesday, but at the moment I'm still kind of leaning pro Haaland just because, I mean, I know that you just said he was off this summer. It was like, just putting on weight, eating
sandwich after sandwich,
Doritos. I don't know what he was eating, right? But yeah, prawn sandwiches. But in theory, he's been off all summer. He's ready to go. Ipswich in game week 2. So maybe I changed my strategy after a couple of weeks. But at the moment, I do like the Watkins Haaland duo up front.
We're going to have to talk a lot more about Cole Palmer when we come back for the midfielder discussion next week, because I feel like he's a must-have. Just like the points that he put together last season, just like the penalties alone are terrifying. And where you have forwards where there might be some unknowns. I mean, Douglas Luiz leaving Aston Villa. Is there a ripple effect there? Palmer, I just see Chelsea getting better and not worse. And there are teams like City and Villa where I wonder if it goes the other direction. Arsenal and Chelsea right now, I'm thinking of, these teams are probably going to get better. So this is kind of how the framework I'm dealing with.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I really want to see some preseason matches for Chelsea too, because I think that Nicholas Jackson is an interesting option. I think that Nkunku is probably the one that I would be most sort of intrigued by, right? If Nkunku gets a chance to, I mean, and there's even a possibility that we get Nkunku as a kind of out of position player, right? Like he's been classified as a midfielder this season, but I think we could possibly see him start as a forward. And if so, I think that, there'd be a ton of value there. I'm a little curious about the penalty thing with Palmer. I mean, I think Palmer's great. Like I'm not going to sit here and make some strong anti-Palmer argument, but I do feel like that many penalties. I mean, I don't know how replicable that is, right? I'm not sure that's like I don't know. It feels like penalties can vacillate a lot season to season, right? I feel like we've seen this with Bruno and Salah and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, so let's wait. We're going to do midfielders next week. So we'll hold off on that at the moment. But the other big forward right now is Isak. He's at 54% owned. I think, again, what you're seeing here, especially, is that if people are not going with Haaland, it does free up a lot of cash up front to spend. And sort of at that point, it kind of makes sense, I think, logically to go with Isak and Watkins as your front two, right? Just because and Isak plays, is it Southampton in game week 1? It's Newcastle hosts Southampton at home in game week 1. So fantastic start. If you don't have Haaland and you were looking for a really strong, I mean, also, Haaland plays away to Chelsea in game week 1 as well. So you could make an argument that that someone like Isak is an even better captaincy pick, right, for game week 1. So I think that there's I think that Isak, I mean, how are you feeling about Isak right now? I know I'm sort of giving away our forward talk, but how are you feeling good about Isak? Like any
I feel
doubts,
great. So going back to the Watkins thing, is I give Isak the edge over Watkins right now, just because there's something about Isak where he feels more like the finished product as far as fantasy assets go. I love Ollie Watkins, but I don't know. It's just the finishing ability that Isak has over virtually everyone else in the Premier League, and it's sort of the reverse of Newcastle going into the Europa League. They will not be playing full strength lineups the way Aston Villa will midweek. So Isak is going to be probably playing fewer minutes heading into every FPL game week.
So are you making? So I'm making a case for maybe not having Palmer. Are you making a case for not having Watkins going into the season? That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think what it's going to end up for me, well, the way I'm thinking right now is Holland, Isak, and bargain guy, bargain third striker like a João Pedro, perhaps.
Yeah. You are the same guy, by the way, who said your only regret last season was not having Watkins for all 38 weeks, right? So yeah. So just clarifying.
Yeah, I mean, these are the stances that everybody has to take at this part of the preseason. You know, controversy creates conversation, Josh, and that's what I'm all about.
That's true. Yeah. All right. Well, let's. We are going to talk forwards. Obviously, have you started to look at your team at all? Have you started to, mock anything up or put together a draft?
I put a draft together, and what's remarkable about it is I have no Liverpool players. Actually, I do have one Liverpool player, 4.0 midfielder, Bacecic, Stefan Bacecic. That guy, 4.5. So obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about fixture difficulty in a moment. Liverpool have an incredible start to the season, so this is worrying to me, and I don't feel like I have my Arsenal strategy fully down yet. So I'm looking at Odegaard right now as a bargain. Like now is the point in the tinkering with your team where you can more easily justify, I'm just going to buck the trend and I'm going to have Odegaard over Saka, or I'm not going to have double Arsenal defense because I like how I can construct my team right now. This team is very sort of blue sky. So I'm a little worried about my approach to Liverpool and Arsenal, mostly.
I put together a team in about, a minute and a half over the weekend. Sort of looked at it a little bit last night, tinkered with it again today. But it's not really anything serious yet because we're going to see a lot of transfers. We're going to see some preseason matches. I mean, they're just questions, I think, that kind of abound, right? Like someone like João Pedro. Is he actually, his ownership keeps creeping higher and higher, I've noticed. And I'm not quite convinced yet, right? Because he has not really been a reliable starter for Brighton. Now, of course, they're under a new manager, but I don't know why that kind of automatically makes him a starter, right? Under a new.
Well, the argument there is De Zerbi is like a legend in the rotation game. Like De Zerbi's favorite thing to do is rotate players, and he would also put João Pedro in weird spots on the pitch. You never knew if he was going to be central or a little wider, but certainly the way De Zerbi played that, it was dependent on sort of the game state. But I think a new manager feels like it's probably going to benefit João Pedro as a fantasy asset. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a manager that rotates as much as De Zerbi, especially at a club like Brighton. So, and I think the minutes that João Pedro got were good enough for me. If he gets more consistent starts, he's probably the best value, I think, for a cheap forward because he does have penalties in his arsenal.
And Ferguson is out until early October, right? And so if he's out that long, then we're not really talking about him necessarily coming back days later, right?
Sure.
We're talking about some sub appearances and things like that. So you can probably safely have Pedro. So again, this is what I'm saying. I'm not down on him. I want to see. I just want to see some Brighton lineups. Right? We have a bunch of new men. I mean, I'm in the same spot as you. I don't have any Liverpool players in my squad at the moment either. But part of it is I find it very hard to decide what to do. Right? Someone like Darwin, 11 goals, 11 assists last season, but was basically a bench player by the end of the season. Right? It was not trusted to start any longer. Cody Gakpo looks fantastic over the summer, but is about to get, he's in the midst of several weeks off ahead of the season. So does he jump right into the squad? Just a lot of questions with a lot of the new managers. So, when I was putting together a squad, it was basically the question I was trying to ask myself is whether I could put together a squad that had Watkins, Holland, and Isak up front, and whether that would make sense. Like whether that, because that's a lot of money, right? Holland alone is 15 million, Isak's 8.5, Watkins is 9, right? So, but those three forwards are taking up almost a third of my cash, right, that I have available to spend on 15 players, right? So 3 players are taking up 30%, and so that just makes me it makes my midfield super weak, right? And so I don't actually think it's workable long term. And I think Isak probably has to go at some point. Probably makes way for, basically I'll probably find a way to bring in Anthony Gordon at 7.5 million as a forward, just to have some Newcastle asset, and then find someone else that I can slot in. I like Eze at the moment at 7 million. I think he makes a lot of sense. And I didn't know, by the way, that Mateta is playing for the French Olympic team.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see this? Not only is he playing for the French Olympic team, but Alexander Lacazette, our boy, is the captain of this Olympic team.
I actually watched some highlights on YouTube last night of their last game. I don't remember who they were playing. And Michael Elise ended up scoring the game-winning goal for them. Lacazette missed so many chances. He looked like he had a very poor game. Came off with a very sad look on his face around the 70th minute. Mateta looked good. He was definitely a presence up front, like we were used to seeing at Palace. So there's some real ballers on that U23 team.
Yeah, and my midfield right now, and this is the team that I mocked up, I've got Nkunku, Garnacho, Odegaard, Eze. I mean, I probably have 2 trustworthy players out of 4, right? In that squad. It's just not going to work, I don't think. But it's fun just to tinker during this, during the early season. And Gvardiol, I feel like, is another player that again, he did play in Europe, although Serbia didn't make it into the or not Serbia. Serbia. Is Gvardiol? No, he's
Croatian.
Croatia. Excuse me. Of course. Yeah. Although Croatia didn't make it either, into the round of 16. So he doesn't have too much tread on his tires. I think he'll be back by the start of the season. He's not traveling to the U.S. for their tournament, which actually, as a reminder, I'm going to be at this upcoming Saturday, Brandon. So it's going to be a little
scouting in person. I love it.
Scouting person. If you're going to be there, let me know. I'll be there with my 7-year-old. But Gvardiol, Gabriel, and Dan Burn are my starting 3. I think that's a pretty template-ish starting 3. I know some people have Saliba in their squad, and but with Saliba and Gabriel at the same price, I think it just makes sense to go with Gabriel because I just think he's got more goal threat in the box, and I'll take a little goal threat over maybe a little bit of a bonus point. Even the bonus points I think are pretty marginal, right? Because if you expect more goal threat, you should get more bonus, from that as well.
Totally. Yeah. I think my differences here are Watkins is João Pedro, and then I don't have Nkunku, Garnacho, Eze. I've made room there for Anthony Gordon, and who else would it be in the midfield? Oh, Palmer, of course.
Right.
So
right.
I wonder if the decision is going to be, if you go with Haaland, you're going to have to pick one of 3 between Saka, Palmer, and Salah. I'm sure there are ways to get 2 of those 3 maybe, but it just feels like you're going to bring in some real scrubs.
I'm almost scared to, once I put together a team without Haaland in it, it's going to be really hard to go back to a team with Haaland in it, right? Because once you, let's say in your squad, right? Let's say you move Ollie Watkins, or you move Haaland to Watkins, right? You free up 6 million.
Yeah.
Like that is so much.
Yeah.
That basically that turns like Eze into Mo Salah, right? It's like it's a gigantic difference. Eze is an excellent fantasy asset, I think, this season, right? But it just shows you, or you could upgrade 5 other spots, right? It's like sort of everywhere. The money just can be spread around in so many different ways. And so I kind of wonder if I'm ultimately going to end up without Haaland. It's just hard to say, because I think if you go without Haaland, the one thing it creates is a situation where every single week you're sweating the captaincy. And part of the appeal of Haaland is that he's such an incredibly consistent player that you can basically just captain him every single week, right? As long as he's healthy, there's tremendous goal threat there, good opportunity for a very high ceiling return. If Ipswich, I don't think you should ever build an entire strategy around one fixture, but that Ipswich home fixture in game week 2 does kind of loom for me as a match where I could just see a really massive return from Haaland, right? And so that's part of the appeal, I think, for him there.
Yeah, that's the big one, Haaland. It's like one of 2 things is going to happen. You're going to be panicking in game week 2 because you don't have him, or you're going to feel very smug because you do. Or a third option where you're going to feel like an idiot because you do have him. And
do you ever feel you strike me as somebody who does feel smug from time to time.
All the time.
I don't know that I've ever felt smug in my life, to be totally honest. I think that's like I don't know. I don't feel like once I feel smug, there's some part of my brain that's like, oh man, like maybe it's because I was raised Catholic or something.
Yeah.
But I'm like, the second there's like a feeling of smugness, my brain is like, oh, you're heading for a big time fall, buddy.
Let's talk about this. What's the hardest thing to do? If Haaland, depending on what happens with Haaland in game weeks 1 or 2,
Yeah.
is it harder to get Haaland in, or is it harder to get Haaland out? I wonder if it's harder to get Haaland out of your team, because I think the reason you'd get Haaland out of your team is because he's blocking you from getting 3 or 4 other guys who might be hitting, and you need that to be able to sort of grab that variance in the midfield with the budget you're missing because you have Haaland. So
I think it depends on how you spread the money around, right? If you turn Haaland into 5 different options, then obviously it's hard. If you turn Haaland into Salah, right, then I think it's a little bit easier, right? You can basically get there in 2 moves. So I think that's really what it comes down to, right? Is whether you basically whether you want to go for another like kind of massive player, or because even Palmer doesn't quite get you there, right? Like to get from Watkins to Haaland, you have to turn Palmer into like a 4.5 million midfielder, right? So it doesn't really work. Like, I mean, it's kind of only Salah that it really would make sense for that to be like a fairly straightforward move.
Right.
I mean, if you have 5 transfers to do it, then that's fine.
That's the thing. You kind of have to ride out the Haaland narrative for the first 5 weeks, and then you'll be fine.
Yeah. When do you think you'll make your first transfer? Do you think it'll be game week 6, or do you think that you'll?
It'll game week 3, maybe.
Game week 3. Yeah, that sounds about right. All right. Well, let's get into. I'm going to stop sharing this team because I don't want too much criticism, because that team is not. I don't like sharing my team too much this early on in the season, right? Because I find myself, I know sometimes like people like will share their team on Twitter or on our Discord or whatever, and I feel like there's like a part of like there's like it's like people get into like a defensive crouch like right away. Like the second you share it, you start to like. It's like some people just like they can like put it out into the world and it's like, there it is. Right. But other people are like, I have to defend every single thing that I've done. Right. And I'm not ready to do that. I like maybe by the time we do our game week 1 preview pod, I feel like I should be ready to talk and be serious. But I think until then, it's just kind of a mess. That's sort of how I feel in my squad.
Oh, so we're all, even though we're the ones hosting the podcast, we're all in early learning here, and I think we're just like it's all theoretical. We need to, like all science, Josh, we need to actually get into the laboratory and start running some experiments, and basically that is what you're going to be doing at the Man City AC Milan match. Any of us watching highlights on YouTube, seeing what the formations are, who's working well in those formations, etc.
All right, well, let's get into some proper pod stuff now, Brandon. Nice long 33-minute start to this week's episode. Patreon is up and running. If you want to support the podcast, that you get an extra podcast each week, and go to patreon.com/alwayscheating. Just since we last did our pod, Brandon, we got some new patrons, and thank you to Rom Frosk, new producer Rom Frosk, and James Watts. Hello, James. And
hey, James.
And I assume Ron Frosk is it's just one, like I think that's that person's it's just one name. It's like Madonna, just one simple first name. Maybe it could be Ron Frosk, like just like that name twice, right? But
I think Ron Frosk has been around the Patreon community for a while. I always think of the band Rammstein.
I do too.
See his name.
I know he's a returning. It's nice to have him back though. Thanks for coming back. So if you support the podcast on Patreon, you get an extra podcast each week. New as of this season, ad-free podcast feed. So I know some people have been clamoring for that. We finally did it. And part of the appeal of that as well is that means we can drop all of the pods. It's just one feed. So if you're a Patreon supporter, you get the Patreon pod and our other pod all in one feed. It makes it quite a lot easier for patrons. And, it's I'm a second Captain's World Service podcast member, as are you, Brandon, and it's very nice just to get the one simple feed for everything. So I think that will make things easier for people. You also we have a ton of mini leagues for our Patreon supporters. Been a lot of mini leagues that other people have started, international mini leagues. I hope our friend Shiv is doing this again, Brandon, where it's beat the average mini league.
Yes.
And it's yes. Yeah. Maybe it was Eric, one of our Patreon supporters. And basically Eric, it was Eric. You basically just have to finish better than average. And every week, if you finish better than average, you get to stay in the mini league. It was shocking what a bloodbath this was. It is. You think it would be quite easy. It's like one of these suicide leagues where it's like, oh, all you have to do is pick a team, not to lose. Like, how hard could that be? And it's like every week, it's like third of the people are gone.
Yeah. One thing that's bubbling up too on the Discord is our first ever community team, and our friend Francis is going to get that off the ground. But that's going to be fun. Get everybody on the Patreon an opportunity to actually run the Always Cheating community team. We'll see if that can beat the average too. So like tons of leagues bubbling up, small and large. And this is always my favorite time of the season for that stuff, to be like, oh yeah, remind me of the rules. Every league has its own little special rule that I have to remember.
Yeah, and we do lots of kit giveaway contests during the season as well, including then this one that I've got behind me here. So, Brandon, then we're also very excited to partner with the Fantasy Football Hub again this season. We had a great call with Holly, the famous Holly, Brandon, a couple of days ago. It was very exciting. It's fun to be part of that community. And they have a bunch of great features this season. I think the win your mini league or get your money back feature is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
I feel like that's something I would, we're in some pretty competitive mini leagues, Brandon. So I think if I legally were able to do that, I would be, I'd be ready to go. That'd be an incentive enough for me to join. You can also get your team rated by AI, Brandon. Perhaps you've seen the movie AI with Will Smith.
I've seen Simone starring Al Pacino. Yeah. Is it anything like Simone?
You can pick the evil alien from AI, or you can pick Simone to rate your team. So you have two options, which is great. They're both huge FPL players and fans.
Fantastic.
And despite being, well, I don't know, is Simone evil? The AI from AI definitely is.
I think she's evil in that she uses her powers of seduction, maybe to make men do things that they wouldn't normally do. Is that bad or good? Who's to say?
I can't go with you. You're misanthropy here, Brandon, but but the expert team reveals and advice. You can see the game week 1 squad of some of the all-time best fantasy players. It's really useful, right? And I don't think I think honestly, it's just it spurs ideas. I think that most people there's the idea that people are just going to blindly copy, but for me, that's not how I play. That's not how I want to play. But I do like looking at other people's squads because I want to know what the smart people are thinking, because it spurs ideas for my own team. It doesn't make me doubt myself. It just gives me more ideas, to put together my own squad.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about because we ran the same promotion last year, the win your mini league or get your money back from the hub. Is it a gimmick? And it's distinctly not a gimmick, because just becoming a member of a site like this just makes you that much more motivated. It makes you that much more engaged. We hear this from listeners of Always Cheating all the time, of like, hey, I've been a kind of a casual player of the game, and this is my first season listening to your pod, and I had my best finish ever because of that. And it just means, hey, you made a conscious decision to be a little bit more engaged with your team. So if this is the season where you think I'm going to beat my buddies, I'm going to beat my coworkers, I think it's worth giving it a shot. So you have 50% off at fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always at any tier that you want to grab there. It's 50% off with that code /always.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes as well, so you can just click a button to take advantage. Just click. Our Super League is also live, so you can get that. I'm not going to read off the code because I can't imagine anyone's actually writing this thing down. But if you go to alwayscheating.com, you can get access to the Always Cheating. There's a big button right at the top. Just click that button, and you're good to go. All right, Brian, should we get into our proper forward talk here?
Yeah.
All right. I put together, and I will share this. I put together a little database, and again, it's all cheerfully taken, Brandon, from FF stuff. I want to give them full credit. So it's but I just sort of sorted it and organized it in a way that I thought made sense. And so I will, what I'll do is I'll drop this into our Discord. and anybody who wants to take a look at this or use this as a reference tool is free. So if you become a Patreon supporter, then you can take advantage of that. Of course, you can just get it yourself, but just if you want the kind of cleaned up, if you really like everything in Calibri font, Brandon, then you're really going to be happy with.
I see you're at font size 13 here. That's a little too big, honestly. Come on.
Well, I knew I was going to be sharing it on the pod, and so I was like, I better go up on this. Okay. I think normally I'd be working in like an 11, but I was like, all right, let's do
the elegant way.
Yeah, exactly. But I was like, I'll do it this way. But what's nice is you've got the I've got it sorted by forwards here, obviously. Although all the players are on this chart as well. But you can kind of see you got the 2024, 2025 data, and then all of last season's information as well. And so the way that we're going to talk about forwards on this pod is we're going to talk about them in terms of tiers. So basically, how much are they going to make you cry this season, Brandon? It's a tier system. So weeping is the weeping tier is the final tier, Brandon. Mm-hmm. And no, it's we're starting with that was like an incredible dad joke that I just pulled off there. I'm sorry. I'm around a 7-year-old too much, Brandon, and this is really what
I totally blanked out while you were talking there. So it's no harm, no foul.
So we have different tiers though. Basically we've got we'll start off with tier 1, Brandon. Okay. And this is an idea that you see this a lot when you look. I don't know if you don't strike me as the kind of guy who reads things like NBA draft previews. No. I can't imagine you're looking at John Hollinger's NBA draft.
Never heard of him.
Right. Fair enough. There's often when they look at draft prospects for the season, they group things into tiers. Right. And so you have kind of future superstar is kind of like the top tier, right? And sometimes there's literally 0 players that are in that top tier, right? And then you've got potential all-star, right? Is tier 2. Usually there's a handful of players that are there. And that's kind of like reliable starters is the third tier, and on from there, right? And so that's, I think, a little bit how we can think about forwards going into this season as well, is who are kind of the best, and then who's going to fill out our squad. Yeah. You only have 3 spots, and so I think, and everyone's going to be a little bit different in terms of their team structure as well. You and I have both tended to play with 3 forwards, although neither of us are married to it. I find that playing with 3 tends to be what I want to do. Like, I want to start 3 forwards. I think the rationale is pretty simple, possibly dumb, but the rationale is basically like they score goals, and goals are one of the most important things that you get in fantasy. And so, and especially nowadays where you have these sort of versatile Kai Havertz style forwards, right? Who are able to score and set up other players for assists as well. I mean, I think we just have a lot of very versatile forwards. I mean, Ollie Watkins is a great example of this too, right? A player who's just as happy to assist as he is to score. And now that he's kind of put it all together, he's turned into one of the best fantasy players in the game, right? So, so basically, we have the tier 1 are elite forwards, Brandon, and that is 2 players: Erling Haaland at 15 million and Ollie Watkins at 9 million. Haaland is 27 goals, 8 assists last season, a slight step down from the season before, although part of that is that he missed, what was it, like roughly 2 months or so with injury last season, January. Yeah, February. When
you put it in context, it still is almost as staggering as his first season with Man City. You're like, this guy, by all accounts, had a downbeat season. He missed a number of games through injury, and here he is with 27 goals. It's incredible, his efficiency. And I think the problem from a fantasy point of view is the stretches were too long where he was not producing. Like he gets to 27 goals because he has a handful of games where he's scoring a brace or a hat trick or even 4 goals. And that really gets you through. But what that means is you're kind of suffering through some stretches of the season. And now that he's 15 million, people's patience for suffering like that is going to be slim to none. People won't even.
Yeah. It was already hard last year, right? And now it's going to be even harder at 15 million.
And the temptation to captain him not the temptation, but almost the necessity to captain him
Yeah.
makes that even more painful when he gets, he gets nicked by a cheaper forward, be it the Isak or Watkins. So that's the concern here.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I'm sort of talking myself out of Holland as we go through this pod already. We're sort of we're learning as we go early on in the season here as well, Brent. I mean, you and I both just had the prices for 5 days now, and so it's sort of, it takes a little while to process how the prices. And that's actually why it's useful to start setting up some drafts. It's one thing to sort of think about players, but until you start to actually try to fit them all into your squad, it really does change your perspective a little bit. And I think it's interesting to compare. And so the other, so we have Haaland, and then we have Watkins as the other player. And I think it's, when you look at what they did last season, Watkins 8 fewer goals than Haaland, but 10 more assists in the season, outscored him by 11 points in terms of total fantasy points. Again, healthier, but still, fantastic return. Even if you look at the points per game average, it's not significantly lower than Haaland. That's a column I here, Brandon, if you're following along on my little chart. So 6.2 points per game average, a little short, but again, why exactly is he 6 million cheaper than Haaland? It feels like either Haaland should be less or Watkins should be more. Watkins at 9 million is starting to feel to me like he might just be priced too low, honestly, given I don't know how much of a downturn can we expect from him this season, right? I mean, he played, it felt like he scored every 8 minutes. He was on the pitch for, I mean, he was terrific in the the Euros when he actually, played and got minutes. And so I don't know. It's
what the pricers of these players are suggesting, I think, by him being 6 million cheaper than Haaland, is there's going to be a regression from Watkins. That's the suggestion. Or it's just like, the likeliest outcome is that Watkins is not going to have as good a fantasy season this season. So you don't want to totally price him out so that nobody gets him and nobody ever has him throughout the course of the season. But you don't want to, of course, price him too cheap. So if he has the same season as he did last season at 9 million, he'll be at 11.5 next season for a guess.
Yeah. And so I just think when you start to look at that, I mean, even in terms of bonus, he and Haaland were tied on bonus points for the season. So I really think that if you're, I think you can really make a case for just sort of seeing Watkins as a kind of, as a very similar asset to Haaland. I mean, even in terms of ceiling, I mean, how much higher is Haaland's ceiling than Watkins? I mean, Watkins had some absolutely spectacular matches last season too. So
again, I go back to the Douglas Luiz. He's just completed his transfer to AC Milan. How much does that whole thing start to get shaky? Because Douglas Luiz, more of a ball carrying or defensive or midfield destroyer sort.
Yeah,
it's, you take those players out, and it's a bit of a worry. He could certainly be replaced by as good or better player. But then you've got John McGinn, who's also a mainstay in the midfield, who's getting older. And what kind of output can we suggest? Can we expect? It's kind of, I think it's just going to be a transitional moment for Villa. They will have a war chest going into the Champions League. So, I will certainly be proved wrong. I think they will strengthen with the Douglas Luiz money and whatever they're going to spend for there. But how long is that going to take to get that right? It might not be at the start of the season.
In terms of buys that they've done so far in the offseason, I think the one that they've, the biggest one they've made so far is Ian Maatsen, who moved over from Chelsea. It's a massive deal, a little more than I was expecting for Maatsen. He signed for, it was $40 million deal. So presumably he's going to be the left back. It's been a little unsteady, right? The left back spot. Dean has played well, but feels like they've never totally
Moreno is could be better than Dean, but he's kind of weird.
Yeah, it feels like they've just never totally found a comfort level with any of the left backs. And so I don't know if that doesn't necessarily do anything for the kind of Diaz question, but if there's another talented kind of ball carrier up the left, that could help Watkins. And Watkins sort of traditionally does play. I think of him as a sort of left he leans left, Brandon.
Mm.
I'm not talking about his politics here, but I mean, I think he did even when he was with Brentford, right? Didn't he sort of play as on the left wing at Brentford?
I'd
I
be
believe he
talking.
did when
Yeah.
he played with Tony.
I don't
Yeah,
think he ever played with Tony though.
Tony. They were never together at
I
Brentford.
think Tony came into Brentford after Watkins left.
Okay, we're gonna have to look this up. That's
Okay.
usually I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I hate to be wrong, Brandon, and I rarely am, but maybe it's possible you're right here. All right, so we know a lot about those two guys, right? And so we don't need to go too much into the Holland Watkins thing. I think the players beyond that are where you start to get into some interesting debates, some interesting questions. And so we've got tier 2, Brandon. I guess this is, again, if I'm using my NBA system, these are potential all-stars, right? They're these are not Hall of Famers, right? They're all-stars. This is your let's think about your Paul Georges, Brandon,
Great.
your the 25 points per game kind of guys. All right. So we've got let's start things off with Isak. 8.5 million, another player who came in at a terrific price. 21 goals, 4 assists last season. Callum Wilson apparently just got injured again. This was I read this in an Everton newspaper last evening, Brandon. That tells you how deep I was digging. The reason this is an Everton newspaper
Have it at the local coffee shop?
No, it was online. I guess it was a digital newspaper, but they were talking about it because Newcastle had been rumored at times to be looking at Dominic Calvert-Lewin as a potential kind of backup forward option. And so now Everton is worried again that I'm kind of like, well, if you can sell high on Calvert-Lewin, that's like that's
Everton
a miracle.
would be getting away with murder there.
Yeah, I mean, we all like Calvert-Lewin, but
horrible season last season.
He's had like 5 horrible seasons. He's like, he can't stay healthy. It's like, I mean, I like him
even when he was healthy. He was healthy for a good stretch last season and could not score a goal.
I know it's maybe he needs a change of scenery. I don't know. But Isak is not only is Isak a terrific goal scorer, as you mentioned, great finisher. He's on pens. He is also a super fun player, right? Like if part of the ethos of the Always Cheating podcast is make fantasy fun again, right? Like make sure that you're having a good time while you're playing fantasy. I think that Isak fits the bill. There's just something about his style. Like he's so lanky and like he's in the body, I don't know. I don't know. Like there's something about the way he runs. He's a great passer too. I just really enjoy, like, he can run with the ball. It's just like when you're watching a Newcastle match, Isak he's like, he's not like, who's like a good, like Chris Wood, for example, right? He is no Chris Wood. Like there's a lot of dynamism in Isak's game. Do you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I do. He's got his gait is really impressive, and I sometimes I'm worried about players who have a slighter build. But I just think how Isak uses his body is so impressive. It's almost more impressive than how Holland uses his strength, because that's just sort of obvious. Of course, Holland has that frame. That's how he's going to use it. Isak, I just you kind of don't exactly know what movement he's going to make next, and it's usually really crafty or smart, and he's really good at just like working the space. And like we're saying, that finishing is with Kane out of the league.
Yep,
Isak might be the best, just straight up finisher of the ball we have right now.
And again, they have a great game week 1 match, right? Home to Southampton in game week 1. So if you put together a team and you don't have Holland in your squad and you're like sort of anxious about who your captaincy is going to be for game week 1, I think that Isak is an excellent captain shot for game week 1. I think sometimes you can just think about these players in terms of their kind of floor and their ceiling. And I just feel like the floor for Isak in a home match, game week 1, incredible stadium, great fans. It's hard for me to imagine him going without a return in that match, right? Like, it just feels like his floor is an assist, right? Maybe it's a goal. Like it's very hard for me to imagine him not getting anything from that. So that's another thing I think to recommend him, for early on in the season.
Yeah, I feel like he he wants to be the talisman of that team. I think there are a lot of great players at Newcastle right now who just kind of struggled for fitness last season, but Isak just kind of stands apart from even somebody like Gordon, where he would say it's my team, and I love that.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, again, he's just a fun player. And the price is good too. I mean, 8.5 million is a fairly easy. I think in general, the forward prices are all very reasonable. It's very easy. I mean, they really have challenged you, right? It's do you and I think I just think the pricing was very good this season in FPL. And it's basically, do you want Holland or do you want a bunch of reasonably priced forwards, right? Because you can sort of get a lot of really good players for an affordable price, and you can kind of double down, in your midfield. So I think it's a great challenge, and I think it should lead to a lot of variety in terms of all you had to do was price Holland at 15 million to get this, right? Because there's some people who won't be able to resist, possibly self-included, right? Having Holland, but if you don't, then it really opens up a lot of variety. Someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's impossible, right? In a Holland squad, maybe starts to make sense. So. All right, let's move on.
Yeah,
oh, yes,
I'm going to take you there to Solanke, who I just can't figure out what I think about him now. I feel last season I finally came around to I want this guy as frequently as makes sense in my fantasy team.
Yep.
I think he probably had his best season in the league last season. 7.5 for a Bournemouth team that has a good manager. You could talk about him in the same way that we might talk about Mateta, in that is the Areola regime at Bournemouth going to take Bournemouth any farther than where they were last season? And with Crystal Palace and Mateta, can Glasner keep that momentum going? Like, which is more likely to you, that Palace keeps going in that positive direction, or that Bournemouth finds another level?
Well, Bournemouth are probably going to be a more stable squad year to year than Palace. I think the loss of Michael Elise is going to be big for them. Although they also have some young players that are really coming on. So I think I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. I think there's more. I think there's more change, and also Palace have just a lot of their players have struggled for health right over the last few seasons, and so I would say that Bournemouth feel like the more stable of the two squads, which probably works in Solanke's favor. He also has a slightly better track record, right? I mean, he's been kind of in and out of the Premier League for several seasons. Didn't really have any appeal as a fantasy asset until Bournemouth came back up, right? And then, but the last 2 years, he's been fantastic. And obviously last season, almost scored, 19 goals, 3. I'm actually surprised those assist numbers aren't higher, because I consider him to be a pretty good passer of the ball as well.
He's not surrounded by. There's no reason for me to take shots at Bournemouth. Bless them.
Yeah.
But I was curious, so I went hunting around for details of Solanke's contract at Bournemouth, which runs through 2027. So he's got like 2 years left, or a little more than 2 years. But he has a buyout clause of 65 million, and I don't see him leaving Bournemouth before the start of this season. And if that's the case, he would want to build on last season to get the move of his dreams going into next summer. So I feel like, given the state of his form and fitness and the contract, it's kind of shaping up for him to have another great season, is my feeling.
Interesting. Yeah. Possible Holland replacement for you, Brandon? Is that where you're leaning, maybe?
Pens. That's all I need to know. Is he on pens?
You want 11 pen takers. Yeah, maybe you can find 3 in the defense as well. And then again, Ederson, who knows? Maybe it's his year.
I mean, 19 goals. He equaled Ollie Watkins' goal output. Now, Solanke does have penalties, and that we didn't even mention with Watkins, is he never took a pen last season.
That's true. With Luis gone, he's never been a great pen taker, but
okay. So that, I guess I was also thinking, like, great shower thoughts. Ollie Watkins, he's got his shot at the number 9 shirt with England after the summer, and Harry Kane's power there is kind of on the wane. Why would Ollie Watkins not want to just take pens for Villa, even though he's not very good at them? If he can get any kind of good at pens for Villa, he can become a bit more talismanic. He can maybe take some. Well, he probably wouldn't take them for England anyway, but it would just really help cement his position with the England squad, I think, if he just scored more goals through penalties.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he just has to make them, right? It can be a real confidence dampener if you take a bunch of pens and only make a. I mean, this happened with Man City a couple years ago. Remember where it was like, I think it was before Holland got there. It was like
Nobody
they could not find anyone. Yeah, they couldn't find anyone to take a pen. And it was like Mahrez kept missing them, and everybody else.
De Bruyne would miss him too.
Yeah. So so let's move on to Kai Havertz, the other one that I'm sort of. I am slowly coming around on the Havertz thing, and what is really impressive about him is just how well he played once he got moved into that forward spot, right? So he had a really, really tough, like almost kind of comically tough start to the season, right? It was Saka ultimately like gave him a pen, right? Like just like Saka was giving away pens to everybody last season. It was ridiculous. And,
generous fella.
Too generous, if you had him in fantasy. But he finally gave Havertz a pen just to get him a goal, right? And but then once he came on, he was incredibly impressive. He had 9 goals and 6 assists in the final 14 matches of the season, right? So he averaged more than a return per match throughout the final 14 matches of the season, which is fantastic for, what he was then, I think, a 7.5 million midfielder. And so now he's an 8 million forward. Arteta loves him. I just can't envision him not at least starting the season in that forward spot again, right? Because Arsenal finished really strong. It was really just that kind of dip in December that cost them, right? The title. So I don't know. Where are you on Havertz right now?
Don't like him.
Okay.
I guess like
is it like you don't like the cut of his jib? You don't like is it that he's German?
He's a strange character. I have no quarrel with the German people, at least in the 21st century.
Sure.
I just look at Arsenal and I think if there are improvements to make in that squad to take them to the next level, I think they need a stronger forward, a stronger striker. And Arteta clearly likes having that versatility that you were talking about with Havertz. But I just think if anyone were to be replaced, it would be to have more of a focal point up front. And then I think Havertz doesn't have a place in the team anymore. So he just, as good as he is and as many good moments as he had for Arsenal last season, he feels like an area of improvement for them.
I just think it's hard to evaluate him, right? And maybe that's why I don't know that I'll start with him this season either. Especially if I hold on to Odegaard. It feels like I've got 2 B+ A- fantasy assets, right? Where you've got the one kind of A option in Saka. And I think that's a real danger. If you look at your squad and it's like sacrifice, and you're kind of doing all of it for balance. And then you're looking, you're like, God, I don't have a star in my team, right? It's like I have all these kind of, I have all the second best players. And I think that can be a risk sometimes when it comes to team building. So I don't know. I think he's like a real, it's hard for me to imagine him being like an average FPL player this season. I feel like he's either going to be incredible, right? Like Watkins level, like goals and assists, like massive returns, more or less constantly, or he's going to be a colossal flop and like down 0.5 million in the first 8 weeks. It feels like there's no in between. Like it's hard for me to imagine him having like a 14 goal, 8 assists kind of season, right? It's like I feel like it's going to be more.
He's
more
the next Olivier Giroud.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it great that like I always had kind of mixed feelings about him with Arsenal, but there's something about him just like still kicking around, playing in LA. It's like warms my heart, It's like it's great to see.
Seems like a good bloke, that guy.
He does seem like a good guy. All right, and then so that's our tier 2, right? So now we've only talked about 5 forwards so far. We're already kind of, I think, off what I would consider to be sort of the top fantasy assets, and now we're into our mid-tier options, right? So these, again, if we're sticking with an NBA comparison, would be your solid starters, right? These guys might start every game for an 82-game season. A couple of them will crack the All-Star team, right? But they're not going to be, they're not going to be all NBA first team, right? They're sort of like they're gonna be kicking around. I don't know why I'm going all NBA.
They might wild card into the playoffs, perhaps, but that's pretty much the extent of it.
Exactly. Maybe they can lead their team to the in-season tournament victory or something like that. So that's our mid-tier, right? There's just a lot of high risk, high reward players. You also have your kind of steady but unspectacular players. It's a real misc, right? And a real Mix. I don't know.
Mix.
Yeah, mix. I said Misk, but I meant
that's fine. We knew what you meant.
Misk is an interesting word.
Milan to Minsk. That's where we're going.
Exactly. Rochelle. So I think we got to kick things off here with Alvarez, who is maybe the ultimate kind of high risk, high reward asset. 7 million. So incredible price if he gets minutes. 11 goals, 11 assists last season. Made it all the way to the Copa America final. Played big minutes. The real worry here is less about him as an FPL asset, more about whether he's actually going to stick around in the Premier League. And there were some kind of worrying signs I saw over the last couple of weeks that it's kind of like, well, we're going to try to keep him, like that sort of thing. But he's he's so good, right? He's such an amazing player, and he kind of lacks, he just lacks a starting spot necessarily for that squad. Right. Yeah. And so I think it does create a pretty, interesting dilemma. I mean, especially if you have Foden playing as well as he has. And, I don't know. I think it makes things really outright, excuse me. I think that, Bernardo Silva has been so spectacular. Like what they're doing works, right? And so it's hard to kind of radically change it. So of course he'll get minutes, but whether that's enough for him to kind of spend his prime as a kind of quasi backup, I can see why he'd be pushing for a move.
Yeah. Is it a possibility that Erling Haaland gets a giant Publishers Clearinghouse size check from Saudi Arabia to go do that while he bides his time for like a Real Madrid contract? And then Julian Alvarez sticks around City to own that position. And then he becomes just like in everybody's team. That's the hopeful thing with Alvarez. The more likely thing, I think, is that Haaland sticks around and Alvarez goes. So, but I think as it is, he's not going to get the minutes we need as fantasy managers. And he's won what he needs to win with City. He's won the freaking World Cup. So he should go. I think City would honor him and let him go get paid somewhere. And
he got 31 starts last season.
That was largely around the De Bruyne injury, though, I believe. Yeah. So, and it's not like De Bruyne is back and going to play 90 every match. So there was that moment when De Bruyne wasn't playing, and then Alvarez and Haaland started together, and that was working really well for fantasy.
Yeah, I think he had 20 plus starts to start the season, right? It was like it was a big number. And then kind of down the stretch, he was in a little more of a kind of backup role. I think also maybe a couple of those, there's some Champions League starts in there as well. But this is always the problem with Man City, right? Is there's the Champions League, there's just a lot of rotation. I mean, ultimately, I can't believe I'm saying this, Brian, but this is another argument against Haaland, honestly, is if they keep them both, then there's, I don't know, just 15 million for a player like Haaland who might miss a couple of starts, right? I mean, he'll probably still get minutes in those matches, but might miss a couple starts for the Champions League is another risk there too. So I don't know, I have Haaland in my squad right now, but I think there are some like real doubts, like some real seeds of doubt that you can plant about whether whether he's worth 15 million.
Right. Okay. So we're generally down on Alvarez overall.
Yeah, sadly, up on him as a human being and player, down on him as a fantasy asset. All right. So that brings us to Mateta. I talked earlier about him being on the French Olympic team, which probably just takes him out of the running at the start of the season, right? Because would he go right from? I mean, the Olympics. I mean, they're going to run almost into the start of the season, right? Like, so I think it's it's not like Crystal Palace have so much squad depth that they can afford to just not play Mateta until game week 4 or something like that.
Give him like an extended. It's Edouard's time.
Yeah, it's Edouard's time until November.
7.5 is a ridiculous price for him. That's too expensive. Pass.
Yeah, I mean, he came on really hot at the end of the season. 16 goals, 7 assists. But I agree. I mean, especially when you can get Eze for 7 million, right? It's like you can get what I think is probably the better fantasy asset for even cheaper. That's really makes it hard to have Mateta in that case. It kind of gets back to that second best point that I was talking about earlier. Again, we got to talk about him, Brandon, like it or not, but Chris Wood, only 6 million, an incredible price, honestly, when you consider the remarkable consistency that you get for him. Like, 14 goals last year. He has double-digit goals in 5 different Premier League seasons, right? So, like, you bring in Chris Wood, every 2.5 games, you are going to get a goal. It's not a terrible return for a 6 million player. I guess I kind of wish he was 5.5. That'd be the one,
Yes,
my
same.
one complaint. He's like almost $500,000 too expensive, but you know, he's not bad. He might even be more like a better option than João Pedro.
Nottingham Forest, though, feels like a very unstable situation.
Permanent. It's permanent unstable. They're like the new Watford, right? There's like a
right.
constant like change, and it somehow it works though.
Brighton just feels like a better run club. I'm putting my chips in with João Pedro here in this competition.
Okay, well, we'll get to him in just a second.
Okay.
First, though, we've got to talk about Nicholas Jackson, who had a really like he was one of the players. Like if we did like a word cloud for last season, I suspect that Nicholas Jackson would have been one of the most talked about. What about one of the most used proper names that we had in the pod last season, because he was very highly owned at the start of the season when Nkunku was injured, kind of thrust in the forward spot, was not ready for it, really. I mean, it was a kind of deer in the headlights start for him. As the season wore on, though, right, started to did he ever start to play completely better? I don't know. I don't ever feel like I saw a match where I was like, oh, Nicholas Jackson, this guy is just destroying the opposition.
Well,
like it never quite.
There are players where, maybe they're just thrust into the spotlight or whatever. They're not playing well, and you can't quite put your finger on it. You're like, is it the system that doesn't really like complement them? Is it their teammates? What's the problem here? Is it a mental thing? With Nicholas Jackson at the start of last season, you could just watch the matches and you could just point at the screen and be like, that's a thing he did wrong. That's a thing he did wrong. That's a thing he did wrong. It was just plainly obvious the mistakes that he was making. So I think toward the end of the season, when the points started coming more consistently, I think it was just that he was less mistake prone. So he kind of just sort of was balancing out to becoming just a level player. So where that leaves me in terms of liking him now as a fantasy asset or not, I think this is like this and Chelsea full stop are like hardcore must preseason investigate mode, because they, with Nkunku and Jackson, they could be in direct competition for goals and assists and points, or maybe they will be a great Voltron force with Cole Palmer, and we want all three of them.
Nkunku is one like 2-goal, 1-assist preseason performance away from being like 50% owned, right? Like he's going to have he's going to play, Vitesse in some preseason match and, destroy him. And it's going to be his FPL ownership is going to skyrocket. All right. Well, we've got a couple other, that brings us to João Pedro, who we've talked about already at the start of the pod. When you look just at his Premier League returns, it's not bad. But when you factor in the number of goals he scored across all competitions last season, because for whatever reason, De Zerbi seemed to trust him more in Europe, or give him more starts. I mean, so he had 9 goals and 3 assists in the Premier League last year. But when you include European goals, he had 20 goals on the season. So he was kind of like a sneaky, he was a sneaky 20-goal scorer last season across all competitions, which is honestly pretty remarkable. Yeah. That's why it's always useful to pop into the transfer market page for these guys, by the way, especially anyone who played in Europe, because the numbers can look so different than what you see if you just look at like the team page. The question is, can he be trusted to start? I think, with Ferguson out, probably. I mean, I guess there's a possibility. I mean, they have a lot of great attacking midfielders, players who could play out of position, right? You could play Matoma as a forward. You could play.
Why would you do that?
I'm just saying, he's a great left winger, but I just mean like there are a lot of players in that midfield who could kind of play in a kind of false 9 sort of role, right? Like, yeah.
I feel like you're.
Don't get too upset here. You're worrying me.
Yeah, there's a word
You're stuttering. You are upset.
There's a word at work that I've started thinking more and more about pre-probleming, where it's just sort of like, this is not a thing. Why are you trying to make it a thing so you can solve it as a problem?
But this is, you have to anticipate future, because we have a pool of roughly 40 plus forwards that are possibilities for our team. So I think it's it behooves us to interrogate every option.
Well, why else are we here?
Yeah,
I just feel like with João Pedro,
yeah.
the sort of like, I don't know if it qualifies as Occam's razor, but just like the easiest solution here is just for whoever's leading the charge on Brighton is just put him in the number 9. And unless you sign somebody else, that's probably as good as it gets until Evan Ferguson is healthy and is the baller that he was before, which may not happen for another season, honestly.
The other thing is I don't really love the start for Brighton. Away to Everton, home to Man United, away to Arsenal in the first 3. It gets better after that. The guy I'm really worried about, though, Brandon, is his competition. Mark O'Mahony is on the Brighton FPL page.
Is that O''Mahony?
Yeah, O''Mahony. Mark O'Mahony is
not Marco. He's not like he's
not like a Croatian. No, he is Mark space O''Mahony is his competition. So Mark O'Mahony, he could be your next. He's only 4.5 million, Brandon. So I'll make a prediction, which is that I will give you a crisp Canadian dollar if you have João Pedro at the start of the season. I will put $1 in the mail and I'll send it to you, and you can just own that. That's not even a bet. You don't have to give me $1. I will just send you $1 if you have. I'll have to go to get it converted somewhere. I mean, where does one even find a Canadian dollar? When growing up in Michigan, I used to have Canadian coins in my pocket all the time. If I had a pocket full of change, at least 2 of those coins were Canadian.
I was walking by a hot dog stand here in Toronto the other day, and I heard somebody talking to the guy in the cart, asking if he accepted U.S. cash, and he was like, "Sure, it's no problem. It's not a big deal." I will send you $1 equally if you have Eze in your game week 1 squad.
That's good. All right, this is a good challenge, and we're gonna hold ourselves to this too. We got to.
Somebody will.
Yeah, somebody will. All right. Now we move on to what I call the high risk, high reward tier. Brendan, I've got 3 players here. I think we can take them all at once. You have Darwin, 7.5 million, 11 goals, 11 assists last season. You have Cody Gakpo, whose returns are really nothing to write home about. He had 8 goals and 5 assists in the Premier League last season. Wasn't really ever a kind of steady starter, but new manager had I thought he was terrific for the Netherlands, arguably their best player. Not even arguably, I think he was clearly the best player in the Euros. So I think that he has a real shot at being an interesting fantasy asset this season. Again, 7.5 million, great price. So, I wonder if Liverpool is going to have some really strong run. In fact, their start is pretty good. And so I think that as we get closer to the season, I just can't have anybody in my current squad because I don't really know who I'm supposed to put there, right? Yeah. Like outside of Salah, the kind of ever consistent option.
My prediction for Arne Slot is under him, one of these 2 players, and not both, will have a breakout season. It's either going to be Darwin Nunez or Cody Gakpo.
I don't know. I saw Darwin play for Uruguay in the Copa. I feel like I watched most of Uruguay's Cup. It's the same old dude. I mean, he just can't finish. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like I honestly don't understand it. It's like he just I guess it's just, I don't know. It's like, I'm not sure it's ever going to get that much better. So
we're getting to the point where we have enough evidence.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The underlines will always be fantastic for him. The results are, 11 and 11 is not bad. I don't want to completely, diminish his returns, but it's interesting when you look at point per game average, right? I think that does tell a different story, right? So the average for Darwin is he averaged 3.7 points per game. Now, granted, some of that is because he had some sub appearances, although I'm not sure how much we should use it as a caveat, because that kind of means he has a tendency to lose managers' trust, which means that he comes off the bench more often. But that points per game average is worse than basically any other forward that you would consider, right? In the top, like, you have to go 10 plus spots down to find any forward that has a worse.
Nico Jackson blew him away with 4.1.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I think that does make things, I think, a little tricky for him. And then I think the other one is Richarlison, who, you and I have never been massive Richarlison fans. There's a lot of data on him as well, right? I mean, it's sort of, again, it's a little bit like the Darwin thing, but a full season, it's like a mini Kai Havertz sort of situation, right? Where it's like got his confidence, started to play better. He's in some ways he's a very complete player. I mean, he can do a lot of different things, right? But it's just sort of he's also a ridiculous player. I mean, he's he's
completely ridiculous. Yes,
he's completely ridiculous. Fun to watch in many ways, but but 11 goals, 4 assists. Again, a strong points, average 4.4 points per game, which is honestly pretty strong considering how much he was kind of in and out of that squad last season. So I think that there is some potential with Darwin still that could be tapped into. I think that Ange, it clearly likes an attacking style of play. Made Spurs one of the most fun teams to watch last year. It didn't feel like Richarlison fully settled in for a good long time, but started to maybe get there as the season went on. So
I don't know. He had a blip where he did start to settle in, and then then it regressed.
Yeah. So it's almost like if he was going to find that, like, I mean, you can see why he gets minutes for Brazil, for example. It feels like he's never going to get to God tier. He's just always going to be he's always going to get you between like 8 and 14 goals. And that's just sort of like, that's the best he can kind of do, right? As a forward.
He's the dime store Alvaro Morata.
Yeah. I like that. I don't, I have to interrogate. I don't even, but I like it. I like the way it sounds. All right. So we have another section here, Brandon. We're now moving on to tier 4, which is, I guess I'm just calling these, I mean, there's no, forwards from promoted clubs in new Premier League transfers, right? So they don't quite fit into the other tiers of people because their numbers come from either outside the Premier League. Well, either from the Championship or from outside England. And so we've got Southampton, Ipswich, and Leicester as the 3 promoted clubs. We'll talk more about them as the season, as we get closer to the season. The one player, by the way, that really stood out for me on Ipswich was this guy, Leif Davis. Are you familiar with Leif Davis?
Tell me everything.
He's a left back who had 18 assists for Ipswich last season. He led the squad in assists, 18 assists. He is available at 4.5 million for Ipswich. I really want to find a way to get Leif Davis into my squad. So we'll talk more about Leif Davis as we get closer to the start of the season. But when it comes to the promoted clubs, we've got Southampton. You got Adam Armstrong, who has a couple of years in the Premier League, really didn't do anything, right? And so we kind of see these yo-yo players, right, who sort of don't do much in the Premier League, go down to the Championship. Who is I'm struggling to remember his name. He played for Norwich and then he moved to Aston Villa. Emi Buendia, right? Buendia was kind of the ultimate at this. Dwight Gale had some of this as well. So Armstrong, though, I mean, just unquestionably an excellent season, right? I mean, 21 goals and 13 assists. That's fantastic no matter what league you're in. Has a bad haircut, I'm not going to necessarily hold that against him, but it has to
hairlines do terrible things.
It has to be said. They do have decent opening fixtures. It's a nice run of fixtures. But once you get past the Newcastle match, to kick things off in game week 1, it's they have Forest away, Man United at home, and Ipswich at home in 3 of their next 4 matches. So if you were going with kind of like a 5 across the middle, rotating third forward or 4 defenders, if you're going big at the back, if you were going to basically rotate your bench a little bit, then I think you could at least make an argument for Armstrong based almost solely on the fixtures, right? That like a couple home matches for Southampton, they're back in the Premier League, the crowd should be fired up. Maybe there's something there, right? And I think part of what I want to do in this very pod is just kind of try to make a positive case for some of these players, right? And so I think that would be the case for Armstrong. When it comes to Ipswich, is really not a lot. They actually they're the highest scoring team in the championship last season. I think they're actually the highest scoring team like for several seasons. Like they were really. They really did a fantastic job. But there's no kind of one standout forward pick, unfortunately. The goals were really spread out across the squad. They got a couple of promoted players, or I mean, a couple of loan players as well. The one to watch would be, could he be a mini Cole Palmer, Brandon? Which is Liam Delap. 21-year-old former Man United Academy player, had 8 goals and 31 appearances for Hull City last year. But again, very, very young player, has a lot of potential. So I think at 5.5 million, he is completely dead on arrival to start the season, but toss him in your, player to watch pile.
Yeah, Ipswich probably go the way of Luton Town, where they're the promoted team that has the most identifiable sort of like team play style, possession-based attack. Exactly. That's the word I was going for. Yeah. And that often results in like flights of fancy for fantasy managers, where you're like, ooh, these guys look fun. They look good. They can score a goal here or there. And will it pan out? It's really hard to say. And then you look at Southampton, probably more likely the team to sort of like try to consolidate and like we gotta hold on to 17th through sheer defensive willpower.
It's a very similar team to the team that went down at the moment. Like it does not feel like things have radically changed.
Yeah, where's Che Adams on this sheet you've got here? My boy Che.
I think he might be classified as a midfielder now. No. Let me double check that. I feel like that might be the case. Where is Adams?
Because he was like playing out on the wing.
I don't know. Does he even play for Southampton anymore? I'm not seeing him.
Maybe his contract ran out. This is very odd. Yeah, they clearly need to update some of the player profiles on the fantasy side for these teams.
Yeah, I am just straight up. Maybe I'm just missing it because we're potting and sometimes like my brain doesn't.
I'm not seeing him on the FPL side either.
Yeah, I'm not seeing him either. So Che Adams, he's probably going to come in at 13, 14 million. I mean, he's probably going to be after Holland the most. No, at the moment there's a lot of even Lallana. They've added Lallana from Brighton. That's an interesting move. So
looks like the internet tells me he might be going to Torino in Italy.
Che Adams?
Yeah.
Well, the Scots love Torino, Brandon, and so I can see him going there.
I'm sure they're ridiculous for this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So then we round things out with Leicester. You have our old friend Jaime Vardy, 20 goals and 2 assists, a classic Vardy return in 37 matches for Leicester last season. He's 37 years old, and he looked cooked by the end of the last Premier League season. He looked completely spent. I really don't see any. I can't imagine having Vardy, at least like maybe for a double game week or an incredible run of fixtures or something like that. But I think I love Vardy, like genuinely, like it's one of the Premier League's all-time great stories. And a player, like I was talking about Isak earlier, a player who is Vardy's just incredibly fun to watch, right? Everybody loves Jamie Vardy, but I do not see myself having Vardy this season, sadly.
There's no conceivable way in which Leicester build a strategy around starting Jamie Vardy. So he's going to be, the spirit in the locker room. Come on for some sub appearances. This is not a good fantasy solution for us, unfortunately. But yes, I kind of will hold out secret hope that at some point in the midpoint or latter in the season, there will be some sort of injury or whatever that allows Jamie Vardy a guaranteed run. And it'll make sense for us to all get him in for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and no one else was really like Daka. I really thought he had a lot of potential, but he still hasn't really come on. Didn't really do much, and I just feel like if you're scoring single digit levels of goals in the Premier League, or I mean in the Championship, you're just completely out. The Championship is like it's like first of all, it's like 45 matches, right, or whatever it is, 46, and so it's. That alone makes it like the numbers should be like the Dutch league, right? Like you got to be banging in like 15 plus for us to even be, thinking about you going into your Premier League season. So yeah, I don't really see it. And then a couple of transfers. I'm sure we'll see more as the season gets closer. You have Joshua Zirkzee, the Dutch player who just signed for Man United. I think it was just last week that finally wrapped. Didn't really get a ton of minutes for the Dutch. I think he got his. I think it might have been his debut in the quarterfinal match for the Dutch. And so, long way to. Not anyone that I would consider at the start of the season.
Xerxes sounds too much like the final boss in a Ghostbusters movie.
Yeah, well, there's also Xerxes, the great Persian ruler, right? Or is there Xerxes? Isn't that isn't he?
That sounds right.
Isn't Xerxes a Persian? Yeah. I haven't seen 300 in a while, but I think.
Well, let's do a watch along. Always cheating 300 watch along.
Yeah, 12 goals and 7 assists and 37 appearances for Bologna last season. The one that I think is a little more intriguing, especially if Ivan Toney moves, is Igor Thiago, Brazilian forward that Brentford signed. One of the reasons I'm excited about it is because I just really trust Brentford to make smart signings. They're just not the kind of club that I like. If they're going to spend 30 million pounds on a player, I just assume that they know what they're doing, right? And that it's probably a smart spend because they're just so good at buying and selling top players. And so I think he's one to watch. Not a lot to kind of go on. He was in Club Bruges last season. He was only it's honestly it's a kind of classic story though. A lot of players who are talented in a place like Club Bruges. I feel like Brighton in general are the Brighton loves that Belgian pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
But he had 18 goals in 34 matches there. So, an impressive rate of return. Not one, again, that is a game week 1 option, although Brentford do have a nice start to the season. It'll be interesting. We'll see how he looks in preseason, but at $6 million, it's a good enabler price. So
yeah, it rules out Maupay for anybody who wants to have a little fun there. And
and Wissa's too unreliable, right? That's All right, so that's your forward. I'm sure we could, honestly, we could do 3 hours. There's plenty we didn't talk about, but just that I wanted to give you a range, Brandon, of options to think about, to consider. So let's wrap our forward talk there. Let's end things though, Brandon, with a little listener mailbag. You ready for this? I got questions 3 for you, Brandon, to consider.
Yes.
So Shiv says, who are the auto picks for you as things stand right now? So who in your squad, Brandon, would you consider to be a lock going into game week 1? Do you have a 1, 2, 3 players that are locks?
Certainly Cole Palmer. I think in the spirit of this episode, I could see somehow getting tempted to go Watkins over Isak, but the way we're definitely feeling right now is super pro Isak. Mm-hmm. So I feel like Cole Palmer and Isak are more locks. The thing with other locks across teams is with Arsenal defense, it's going to be a toss up between Saliba and Gabriel. I don't think you could make a strong case for one over the other. You could try anyway. Maybe Gvardiol is the third.
Gvardiol feels like a big one for me as well. To be honest, Watkins, it would be the lock for me. I just feel really good about him. The only question would be whether, because England made the finals of the Euros, that there's some doubt about him starting in game week 1, which I suppose there's a possibility. I don't see it as a super strong possibility, but that's out there.
Sure.
Yep.
I think he starts.
I think so too. Glenn says, I'm setting the line at 3.5 on the over-under this season and how many free transfers out of a maximum of 5 that either AC, Brandon, I don't know why I'm saying our Discord handles, that either Josh or Brandon managed to roll before succumbing. What say you? So in case you missed our last week pod or our one from midweek when the game launched, a big change that's happened going into the season is that you can now keep up to 5 transfers. And even if you wild card, you get to hold on to your transfers, right? So if you have 2 or 3 transfers in your, in your bank available to you, and you wild card, when you come out of the wild card, you will still have those three transfers. That's incredibly interesting in terms of the kind of strategic possibilities it opens up and the things you could possibly do on a wild card, players you might just have for 1 or 2 weeks because it's very easy to sort of transfer them out after that, right? Sometimes you have players who have, one spectacular game, like a home match versus a promoted squad, followed by 3 terrible matches to follow. And you're kind of like, well, I don't really want them because I don't want to burn a transfer to take them out, after the fixture run. So, but with all that said, I think I would take the under on 3.5 for me. I can't see myself ever getting to 4 transfers held. And I would bet the house on you going over 3.5 and having 4 transfers, probably most of the season. Honestly, I could see that's where I see. What do you think? Am I right about this?
I mean, what greater feeling than knowing there's always enough money in the checking account so that those auto pay bills, you're just like, I don't even have to think about that.
That's true.
So
That's
you
true.
get a strong transfer bank going, and then you never have to worry, will I have enough transfers going into next game week? Yeah,
I'll get hard truth there.
I'll get to 4 for sure.
Okay. I think you will too. Amar B, I like this one to end on, Brandon. Amar B says, my 7-year-old's been talking nonstop about the game for weeks. Registered an account and a team for him, and it's going to be his first time playing the game. Yeah. Any tips on how to make fantasy fun for the young ones?
Well, you're the one with a kid. I am without kid. So I don't know. What do you think? Would you ever get your kid involved in fantasy? Is that something that would be fun for you guys to collaborate on?
Yeah, I think eventually. I mean, there are a lot of people. We talked to many people, even people that we know in person, right? Brian, oh my gosh, I'm going to mispronounce his last name. Stelwy, our friend from
Stwally,
excuse me, from the Philadelphia area. He's come to meetups with his with his son before.
Sorry, Brian, but your kid seems cooler than you, so we're really glad that he tagged along.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people play with their kids. My 7-year-old is at the moment too competitive, and they can't deal with losing at all. And so the idea,
they get that from.
Yeah, I know. It's horrible because I don't feel like I've imparted it to Quinn, but somehow it's happened anyway. And so I wouldn't be quite ready for it. But yeah, I was taking sports pretty seriously by the time I was, 8, 9, 10. For me, it was, they didn't really have fantasy when we were kids. And so I was like a baseball cards person, and that's sort of, but like some way to fantasy is great because, especially like if you're interested in the Premier, like this is one of the reasons you and I got into fantasy, whatever it was 14 years ago, is we sort of we just wanted to be more kind of knowledgeable at the Premier League, and then you get hooked on the game, but part of the fun of it is that you start to learn the names of every player, and you learn more about leagues, and you learn more about Europe and England, right? There's a lot that comes with it.
To that point, I wonder if the way to make it fun for a young first timer is to make it more about that process as opposed to the outcome. So maybe what Amar can do with his son is they've got every Friday morning at breakfast, they sit down and look at their teams together and talk about what they're going to do. And then it's not necessarily about, we're going to watch the teams and follow our scores over the course of the weekend, because that's what generates stress and competitiveness. Maybe it's more about the setting of the team and making that the fun, exciting.
Yeah, maybe you set up a head-to-head with them, and you are you play so they don't have like a major, maybe it wouldn't be fun if they're in some 20-person mini league and they're 20th after 3 weeks, but if it's like a head-to-head, then each week it's sort of
the likelihood of your kid getting lucky week to week and really getting one over on you is higher there.
Yeah, you and I have seen this when we've done our head-to-heads with each other, right? It's sort of, it doesn't matter how well one of the other person's doing, you end up roughly 55%. No one ever just kind of runs the table in a head-to-head league, right? Because it's sort of like that, beat the average thing that we talked about before, where you just, a lot of times average, you're just gonna be below average, right? You're some untemplate players are gonna go off.
Gonna happen one week at least.
Yeah, but I think I would try not to over manage them either. At least if my kids any indication, they just hate when I look over their shoulder, for anything, or So I think I just let them pick whoever they want. Don't try to coach them out of it. If they want to have their 3 players from Man United because they're a Man United supporter, then fine. Find 3 that
if they want O'Mahony,
if they want O'Mahony, it's and who doesn't? I want O'Mahony in my squad. Yeah, I hope if my season's done by game week 38, that's my final transfer. Is O'Mahony's coming in. So I think that's a good place to end on here, Brandon. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back with another pod in a few days' time, but I got a long way to go until the season starts. So lots of time to think things through. I think we're going to start to get some, in fact, I know that we are going to start to get some preseason matches over the next few days. So it's a good chance to do a little scouting, not take them ever too seriously, because I think once you start to, you can overdo it with taking too much at a preseason friendlies, but it can be instructive, nonetheless.
Oh, for sure. And don't forget everything that we instructed you upon at the start of the episode, namely for 50% off a membership at Fantasy Football Hub. Go to fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always to get that half off discount. And if you like what you hear, you want to say thanks, and you want to join in on all the fun in the Always Cheating community, hang out with us at patreon.com/always cheating. As Josh mentioned at the top, we've got one ad feed to rule them all. If you're a Patreon supporter, you get all the episodes in one place, ad free, including that extra bonus podcast. It happens every Thursday, starting at the start of the season, where we're closer to the game week deadline, our final thoughts on our own team lineups and all of your rate my teams, etc. Again, patreon.com/always cheating. Josh, you want to read the most important tier for our Patreon subscribership, the producers. We need to thank them.
All right. Thank you to Mike DePietro, Trevor Ingerson, our buddy Chris Howell, Babas Kuhn, James Holland, Dave Wagner-Lodahl, Nick Wright. By the way, it's been so long since we've had Babas Kuhn on here, Brendan. I don't even remember who that is. I can't remember. We renamed somebody that at their request, and I honestly don't even remember. They might not have been a producer for 5 years, and that's just James Holland, Dave Wagner-Lodahl, Nick Wright, Lazarus Llanos, Jesse Halstead. By the way, our friend Dave Wagner-Lodahl finally back, I believe, from his long trip over Denmark. Denmark. Jesse Halstead, Shalin F. Kadakia, Terrence O'Donnell, Heath Cram, Thomas Tisloff, Noah and Louise. They're actually in Denmark too. I should have connected them, actually, Brandon. They were there at the same time. Wow. Travis Grant, Linus Vennerstrom, Bruce Kerr, Brian Chin, Blair Jacobson, Todd Byerly, Andy Portlock, at FPL Merch, Kerry Swanson, Jefferson Turner, Buffalo Wild Mings, Dan Parsons, James C., Matthew Skinner, Fred Jacobson, Brennan, Daniel Hart, Lolly. So many producers, Brandon. It's really wonderful to see them all. Francis Moore, Sam Shower, Caleb Robbie, Velgar Paulson Kruger, Alex Holcomb, James Keatley, The Saint, Bob Fox, Craig Jackson, Ben Coombs, Eric Kite, Gareth H., Rune Sandberg, Brian Clark, and James Murray Wood. Oh, and Ron Frost, our newest producer patron as of a couple days ago. So if you would like to support the podcast, become a patron at any pledge tier. Any tier gets you access to the Discord, and then our kind of featured tier, the Sortoloff tier, is the one that gets you access to the bonus podcast each week. Go to patreon.com/always cheating. You can find all this information and more at alwayscheating.com. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, et al. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, guys.